Can an iPhone change the way we see the world? I don't know, but photography Dmitry Markov has built an entire body of work using just his smartphone, and this might have been one of the most honest street and documentary photography bodies of work of our time. So if you're a photographer, you've possibly heard someone in the field say that to be a serious photographer, you need serious equipment, heavy or more complicated cameras, fancy lenses, and technical mastery and whatnot. And while these are, of course, what many people still consider to be the supposed gateways to more impactful work or better work, I've always believed that great photographers will produce great work in spite of the cameras they might use. And this is actually quite true for Dmitry Markov. After having his camera stolen while volunteering at an orphanage, Dmitry Markov picked up his iPhone and simply kept going. This decision wasn't just about circumstance. For Markov, it became an opportunity to prove that vision matters more than gear. As he told My Modern Met in an interview, quote, "Photography allows you to grasp states and feelings that are difficult to describe with text. It's more than just a creative outlet. It is a social tool to explore the world around me." And if you remember in my last video about William Eggleston, I think it was maybe a month or two ago that I posted, we talked about this idea of the democratic eye, and we talked about the democratization of photography in terms of subject matter. And now here, what I think it's interesting is that not only these photos are obviously extremely beautiful and are extremely valuable as well, in my opinion, actually, I do think that we're talking about a democratization of photography in terms of access, in terms of the tools that were used. And so with this phone, Markov essentially says that there's no intimidation and that there's more intimacy and trust that when compared to a quote-unquote serious photographer. To this effect, he said, quote, "A photographer with professional equipment is less trustworthy than a photographer with a smartphone." In fact, he embraced this not just as a practical choice, but also as a conceptual gesture using a tool of today's consumer culture to reveal the raw, unfiltered side of his own society. When asked about image quality, he kind of shrugged it off. He went on to say something along the lines of, "I don't care about the quality, and if I could, I'd sketch everything by hand." His focus was on authentic connection because he said, quote, "Half of the people I photograph I know personally, and it shows since my photos always have an element of intimacy." And so in an age of social media and marketing that is especially designed for us to keep on consuming and creating this need for upgrades, right? For instance, and this is not just about cameras, but across the board, it feels like whatever you have is never enough. For instance, with iPhones or with, you need to change your routine, you need to be more on top of your game, you need to be producing more money, you need to be buying this and doing that by a certain age. I think there's a lot of pressure and that there's this feeling that nothing is ever enough. And so in this context, I think it's so important to understand the work of Markov and what it's telling us. I think that in many ways, it's also saying that sometimes the most simplest and smallest of cameras or gear can give you the greatest access. And actually, this is something that today's sponsor MPB really understands well, because across the board, across their platform, they actually have used gear for sale of all sorts, all shapes, all sizes, and all price ranges, so that it makes it more accessible to every single person out there, regardless of their budget. MPB buys, sells, and trades used photography and videography gear, which means you can get cameras and lenses at a fraction of the price of new ones. And the best part is that every piece is checked, graded, and comes with a warranty, so you don't have to worry about quality. What I personally love about this is also their circular model, which is better for the planet, inevitably, because by keeping gear in use, they've built a system that avoids wastage. If anything, this video and Markov's work and the platform MPB has built prove that you don't need the most expensive gear to make meaningful images. And so if that's your goal and you've been waiting to try something new, or maybe just grab your first camera, MPB makes it possible without breaking the bank. So thank you, MPB, for kindly sponsoring this segment. Don't forget that links to MPB will be down below, and I'd urge you to check it out wherever you live. See what MPB has in store for you. Now, going back, I think it's important to talk about Markov's work a little bit more, deeply, perhaps talk about his approach and how he took these photos and whatnot, what they represent, what they talk about more deeply, and then also talk about, of course, something that, is my favorite thing, and I do in all my videos, which is what we can learn from all of this. I think Dmitry Markov's photos zoom in, pun intended, on the realities, in this case harsh realities, of everyday life around him. Poverty, addiction, and hardship. His photos are brutally honest, but also quite raw in the feelings that they communicate. In fact, during his life, the photographer worked with several charities, including the Rostock Foundation, where he was involved with community activism and social work, which of course inevitably influenced his photographic work approach and of course also deepened his ties with the social realities that surrounded him. Yet what makes his storytelling powerful in my eyes, and I would argue it's not just this idea of gritty side, for instance, something to me makes Boogie's work really stand out. But with Markov, I think what is interesting is what he finds in those same environments, in the sense of ideas of resilience, hope, moments of joy where a child is playing amidst rundown blocks, or a smile is exchanged on a cold street encounter, or a simple but very random act of kindness. And he described his motivation clearly. Quote, "I wanted to capture the simple person to show the beauty of ordinary life. Most people live like that, and I want to capture them." For the photographer, therefore, contradiction was everywhere. Beauty and suffering, joy and hardship, these could coexist in a single frame. And it's in these tensions that we can acknowledge how universal his storytelling becomes. Whilst Markov didn't shy away from showing life's quote-unquote unpleasant side, he still sought out moments where hope and resilience break through the surface, showing us that life is truly very nuanced. And this is where I think this video, or where I wanted to go with this video, that I feel that there is a lot of realism, of course, in his work, but I do think that there is this sense of hope and resilience in his work that I wanted to focus on. I feel like there's enough of sad realities around us and what we hear and see online and whatnot, to know that the world is pretty grim and has been pretty grim for a really long time and will most likely continue to be pretty grim for a very long time. So I think that sometimes it's good to remind ourselves that there are photographers out there, in this case Markov has unfortunately passed away, but that are still capturing very realistic work, but or very naturalistic in a sense, but with the simplest of methods, and that still is able to showcase hope and resilience. And I think those are two words that we have been missing and we miss in today's world. I mean, there is a lot going on, and I think that it's very, very interesting to showcase and to talk about his work under these kind of two words. But actually, this opens the door to talk about a couple more things that we can learn and we can, that have been featured, in my opinion, with his work, and that we can, take from this video as food for thought. Markov's background as a social worker and volunteer with organizations shaped how he photographed, making the invisible visible. He once said, "I'm not inclined to overestimate the impact of photography on individuals or society as a whole." For us photographers today, I'd say we need to consider and probably understand that simultaneously a single frame can have several limitations but also be extremely powerful. What I mean by this is while a photo can convey a strong emotion, alone it will not revolutionize a whole society. It will not change people's minds. However, at the end of the day, one frame can actually foster an understanding and challenge stereotypes and preconceived notions, especially when shared widely across platforms like social media and media outlets. Therefore, we can also conclude that ultimately photography is a witness. Markov saw photography not just as an art, and in his own eyes, he saw it as more like a service. He used his camera to witness, to document, and sometimes to advocate for change, reminding us that images can draw attention to those often left on the margins. And lastly, and perhaps on a more interesting take on technology, I'd say that as a general, it can be an enabler for a more meaningful presence in society. In an era where we hear so many negative thoughts and points of view of what has changed with the rise of social media and the online world, I think it's important to also remind ourselves that by choosing to shoot almost exclusively with his iPhone, Markov essentially removed a preconceived gatekeeping notion for all new photographers today and in the future. The story, the moment, and the connection, these truly matter more than the price tag of what you're carrying. And so, can an iPhone truly really change the way we see the world? I guess that, judging by today's video, on its own, probably not. It would change the, obviously accessibility of the world and whatnot. But I think that allied or in line with the right vision, I believe it can. And so the real lesson is quite simple. You don't have to wait to save so much money for the perfect lens or the most expensive gear money can buy in order to make meaningful images. What matters is your perspective, your ability to connect, and your willingness to tell stories that only you can tell, because each and every one of us has a different individual identity. And of course, I would say, let's keep all an open mind and an open heart. And sadly, as I said before, Markov passed away in 2024. However, his body of work continues to inspire us to look closer and to notice, I would say, beauty hiding in plain sight. So a question for us today would probably be, if you had to tell a story using only your phone, what would you photograph first? And what would you even photograph? I think today it's been an interesting episode. It's a very different episode in a sense that it's not so much extremely focused on the deepness of an image, but rather the tools behind it. And I think that is quite fitting as well to the things that we've been talking about lately on the channel, also the way I've been feeling about the world. I feel like there's so much pressure to always perform, to always have this and have that and achieve this and achieve that. And I think lately my perspective has, quite changed. Not that I would be I love learning and I love, investing in my, in optimizing my performance, shall I say, in a sense that I like learning, I like to explore new things, I like having new viewpoints, I like seeing what other people can bring to the table. But at the same time, I feel like it's very important, especially with someone who does videos and is on social media, to tackle really this idea that you don't have to constantly be putting out and performing and performing and performing, and that sometimes it's okay to look at things through a different perspective, and that you don't need to upgrade yourself. You just have to start with what you have. And that's why I think the basis of the channel is, or this channel is, very much analysis, discovering new photographers, books and whatnot, because I think that's, a way where you can be more efficient in, the way that you can gather knowledge, change your, mindset and or your frame of mind or trail of thought, and focus more on having a meaningful presence rather than just being another presence, if that makes sense. And yeah, I guess that it's all for today. I'd like to thank MBB for kindly sponsoring a segment in this video, and you know that you can check them out down below. And I'd like to thank their continuous support to the channel, and of course to you for supporting and for watching the videos. It truly means a lot. I really appreciate what I do and having a more conscientious presence online and promoting something that is ultimately positive, whether it's being informed, being educated, use of critical thinking as photographers, as storytellers, as artists, whatever that might be that you do. You don't even need to do any of these, or you're just interested in photography. It doesn't really matter. So I'm very grateful for the opportunity, and I'll catch you in the next video. So take care, stay safe, keep shooting, keep creating, keep learning photography, and I'm out. Peace.